Wie machen wir das denn dann? Können wir dann überhaupt die Begrüßung verzögern? Hallo, guten Tag zusammen. Mein Name ist Georg Maskolo. Ich moderiere das gleich hier und freue mich auf die Diskussion mit Ihnen allen, die aber ein bisschen später anfängt heute, aus einer Kombination von Gründen, die Sie sich vorstellen können, Lufthansa plus Deutsche Bundesbahn, was dazu führt, dass von den Vieren, mit denen ich hier gleich diskutieren werde, abgesehen von Ihnen, Sie haben das alle großartig pünktlich hier geschafft, wie immer Sie es irgendwie gemacht haben, sodass wir jetzt noch einen kleinen Moment warten und ich denke dann in 5 oder in 10 Minuten anfangen. Ich freue mich drauf. Bis gleich.
think you just will stand and start. Bitte.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Munich Security Conference. I'm Vice President of the Foundation Council. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this very important event. As you know, the Munich Security Conference has a long-standing tradition of bringing together security policy discussions out of the closed rooms into the public sphere. With the launch of the European Defense Townhall Series, we are continuing this commitment. And actually, few topics are more important and more consequential for Europe these days than defense issues. And few also have evolved in such a short period of time. For decades after the end of the Cold War, European defense was shaped by what many called the peace dividend. European defense is marked by now decline of military spending. Territorial defense receded from the forefront of planning. And I remember my time in Brussels when I was at the helm of the European Diplomatic Service. We were focusing more and more on crisis management operations, important ones from Afghanistan to the Balkans to the Sahel. But it was not really about European security. And security, of course, could never have been taken for granted, but it was widely assumed to be stable. There was NATO, underpinned by strong Atlantic ties. And, of course, this area is gone for good. Now, one thing is clear also. Defense can no longer be defined alone through the military domain. Hybrid threats, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, more and more important, and the vulnerability of critical infrastructure, from energy grids to undersea cables, have expanded our knowledge in terms of what security actually means. And in an era of shifting alliances, of technological disruptions and resource competition, Europe must be able to defend itself and to protect its citizens, to project stability in its neighborhood, but also beyond. Now, sovereignty does not mean isolation, but it means the ability to make independent choices, to act decisively, and to shape Europe's strategic future. And drawing now on our experience from Zeitenwende on tour, we know that open town hall-style conversations work. They help strengthen trust, illuminate complexity, and bridge what citizens experience locally with the strategic direction Europe must shape going forward. At the heart of this series lies a central question. How do we strengthen Europe's ability to act with sovereignty, clarity, and, of course, in the interest of its citizens? To answer that, of course, we need to have expert insight, but we also need the questions, the concerns, and the ideas coming directly from the citizens, from society. This is crucial. And this is why we are launching this series now publicly, openly, and in direct contact with all of you. So I'm very happy that you're all here, and I will now hand over to our moderator, Georg Maskolo, who does not need any introduction as a very well-known journalist, but also as the Dean of the Bucerius Summer School on Global Governance. So the floor is over to you.
Thank you, Helga. And a warm welcome to all of you. I have to say this is my favorite event at the Munich Security Conference. Before this hotel is turning into a high security perimeter for all the heads of states and ministers arriving, it's your place. It's your opportunity to ask your questions, to agree or to disagree. And I'm very much looking forward to our discussion, which we will start with 2 panelists out of 4. So you see that the problem with Deutsche Bundesbahn and Lufthansa is not solved yet. For those of you who have attended this event in 2025, when my wife moderated here, I apologize in advance because she is the elegant part of the family, but I'll promise you that I'll do my best. With that, I'll introduce our two panelists. We will start here, I think, roughly 45 minutes or so with our conversation, and then it's your part for your questions. For those who do not feel comfortable to ask their questions in English, please do it in German, because we want to hear from all of you. Okay. And without further ado, let me introduce our first two. How did you make it to arrive in time?
I fly Air Baltic, which is a Latvian national airline.
Okay, very good. Sergei, and
The
please share
most
your
punctual
experience.
airline in Europe.
I took a train. I'm coming from Strasbourg, where we have been having our Strasbourg plenary week. And then you drive to Offenburg, to the other side of the border, and it worked. I missed only one train. That's why I was a bit late as well, but everything else worked fine.
Sounds like Europe is a solution.
There is a solution always.
Yeah. Baiba Brace is Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Latvia, Riga, and Sergei Lagodinsky, Member of the European Parliament for the Green Party. Let me start with a quote I have seen yesterday. A high-ranking European official said, we have the diagnosis, we have the prescription, but we haven't gone to the pharmacy. And he was referring to what do we have to do in Europe to become more independent, to solve our problems. So are we on the way to the pharmacy now?
It was not me, huh?
No, it's not you.
I think we also have the prescription. So there's diagnosis, there's prescription, so now it's time for action. And for us in Latvia, in Letland, the action is pretty straightforward. We have to be strong ourselves, so we have to invest nationally in defense and security, so also internal security, the whole society resilience. We have to maintain interoperability among NATO allies, and we have to make sure that all allies invest in defense. So it's not enough that the Baltic states, Poland, a number of others go to 5% for defense. We need that across the alliance. We have to make sure that transatlantic relations work and unity is maintained. And I welcome today the speech that Elbridge Colby gave at NATO Defense Ministers meeting, which clearly underlines that NATO is essential for the US, and they do expect more European action, not just prescriptions or diagnosis. And that has been messaged from the US throughout NATO's history. It's nothing new. We also have to maintain support for Ukraine, because Ukraine is essential for European security and Euro-Atlantic security. So maintaining and advancing that ability to support other countries is crucially important. So I very much welcome the German government's decisions both on national defense spending, on the whole society engagement and resilience, and also on support to Ukraine, straightforward. But we also need weakening Russia. We need to limit Russia's ability to wage war. So it's that pressure through various policy measures that we have. It's not only sanctions, it's also trade, tariffs, limiting income in Russia's budget that is crucially important. And that includes also global isolation. And we have been quite successful of not letting Russia be elected to most important international bodies, such as International Maritime Organization, Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Executive Board, or the latest, Russia wanted to become a member of preparatory committee for the International Conference on War Crimes. Russia. So Slovenia and Ukraine were elected. And so we have to maintain all these policy measures in place to make sure that both income in Russia's budget and the political commitment by international community is there. So we are going to be okay, but it requires action.
Sergei, before I put this question to you, by train or?
Parachute.
Flying.
Flying.
But a completely different route that was prepared originally.
Anna,
Yeah.
so great to have you here, almost in time.
Yes.
Head of Stockholm office and director for Northern Europe Atlantic Council.
Yes.
Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Give her a warm applause, please. And a warm. Thank you. Sergei, the question of the pharmacy.
It's about solutions, just to translate the picture to those who maybe are wondering what it is about pharmacy. I think that we're on our way, but the problems are the structures. If we're talking about European solution and not solution by member states on their own. I've always said we need at least 3 components. Number 1 is resources. Number 2 is strategy, and number 3 is structures, also decision-making structures. And from my perspective, what we're lacking, especially with resources, at least in some countries, and of course everyone here knows what is going on in Germany, and Germany has the new self-confidence in the area of defense. This is, by the way, something that we also should discuss, what it means for the countries surrounding us. But with resources, we might solve the problems. With strategy and structures, I think we're having a problem. We cannot rely on councils taking place every month or every other month with 27 countries, with a couple of spoilers who are blocking decisions, with countries discussing things, postponing the final decision. And we saw this. We need much faster and much clearer decisions. We saw this with drones. When drones appeared, yes, there was a meeting, but nobody actually knew what are the real outcomes of this meeting. What are the real signals towards Moscow, if this was Moscow, but most of us agree that this was probably not some guy from Passing or whatever is here, Steinberger See. And this is a problem. I don't think that the structures that we have now within the European Union are reformable. We cannot wait for us to have another conference of Europe or anything of this type. I think that if we're honest, we should be thinking about structures that are adjacent and connected to the European Union as we know it, connected to NATO as we know it, but at the same time being de facto a parallel military structure of the European Union and allies. My proposal there is the European Security Council, a proposal that was also in the making here in Germany in 2016. I revived it with a study and with my proposals. I know that Andres Kubilius is now also joining forces on promoting this. I think we need a strategic decision-making center which is connected to EU, but has, I call it, the 3 knots. Not without the EU, not the whole EU, so no Hungary, please, and other countries whom we don't trust on this issue, and not against the EU. And if we build this, and it's possible to build it, we already have a coalition of the willing, let's try to institutionalize the decision-making center. And if we do it, then from top down, you will be able to institutionalize and to structure the everything beneath it, how we have the division of labor in terms of our troops, etc., etc. If we don't make this decision now, then there are 2 possibilities. I think we can continue to rely on NATO, but there is a big risk there, and we saw the risk just a couple of months ago with Greenland. And now we have a kind of a revival of a love affair with NATO and with US administration, if you can call it a love affair. But you never know with this administration. Or we will be having big problems because Kremlin is watching us, Peking is watching us, and they're watching very carefully and quite accurately where we can make decisions and where we can't.
Thank you. Anna, for those of us who are attending this conference for a longer time, we are remembering this kind of discussions. You know, Europe has to make progress. I heard this in 2014. I heard it in Trump's first term. But always very little happened, not only in the area of military, but also in the area of intelligence or a common foreign policy. Do you think that what has happened in the last months and years is so much clear and present danger that Europe is really waking up and is taking all this serious and will make meaningful steps? Are you hopeful?
Yes, well, I'm rather hopeful in the sense that I think the shift from the time you described first, 5 years ago, so on, we had a lot of discussions, but there were two things lacking. We did not put the resources in, so you can have a lot of discussion on responsibility and so on, but if you don't have the resources, the assets, the capabilities to come with that responsibility, not much will change. And I think the big bang in defense last year, we had the Hague summit, the pledge of reaching 5% by 2035 or earlier, as actually a few countries are doing. You shouldn't underestimate that. I was in a lot of conversations where we were talking with industry and politicians, and the industry always said, you know, yes, we like your initiatives, but it's peanuts for us. It's nothing really. It's a sign, but it doesn't change anything for us. I think with big investments in defense, there also will come naturally responsibility. We just saw a recent example this week when NATO is shifting its command structure towards more European responsibility. And I think also the suggestion on the European Security Council, we have to think ahead a decade, perhaps 2035. If we start shifting now, our end game will be much further on. We usually have a bit of a confusing discussion. The Americans don't want to be engaged anymore, the Russian threat, it's very urgent. And I agree on all those things. That's affecting the process. But we need to have the vision clear, what we want, and set the goal. If we have the Hague Summit 2035, and if we reach that with 5% of GDP, for most countries at least, would be reasonable, well, what's the European structure there for responsibility? It has to be equivalent. You have to have the political body for steering those investments. You have to have the military structure to act first or act without the United States if that's necessary. So I think we have to keep parallel processes in mind, so to say. But the big difference is there is a shift in the US approach to Europe, and I think there will be nuances in that shift, perhaps, but it's a direction that is likely to proceed, leaving space for more European responsibility, and that's where we have to meet the bar and meet the challenge.
Madam Secretary, we need a vision. So what is it we should be capable of doing ourselves in Europe in a year from now, in 5 years from now?
I think one is to continue what we have started. Since 21, the European defense spending among the allies, NATO allies, which now include also Finland and Sweden, has risen by 40%, more than 40% actually. And that's both by those who already have decided on 5% and those who are still, there are some below 2% of GDP for defense. So continuing this very practical advance. Then, of course, having the EU use its instruments for that benefit, because we need also interoperability, and that is through the military exercises. There are very practical lessons learned through those military exercises, whether they are among groups of allies, whether that's the whole NATO exercise. And those lessons are on military mobility, those lessons are on cyber, those lessons are on critical there's a whole spectrum that is non-military, but on which our military rely, including Bundesbahn. And that's where the role of the EU is very essential, because that's not only regulation, but it's also really easing that decision-making in this respect. It's also funding, so we are negotiating the next MFF, where military mobility is an important part among the connectivity issues, and we hope you are able to maintain that there. So there is also that integrity between those instruments that we have as defense providers within NATO, because that's primarily a defense organization, and the EU, which is much wider. But then also the industry part in all that. We need technological superiority. We just need that against those threats that we are faced with. So there again, one is, okay, classical defense industry, fine. We are now all investing, so production should be coming sooner or later. Germany, at least Rheinmetall, is doing great. There are other parts among the allies that are also doing well. It has to be interoperable. But also, there's a lot of dual use that needs to be produced to enable all that. And that's, as I said, technology. That's both not only drones, but also space. It's the data regulations, the free data flows that is needed for intelligence, and to combine that intel that we have. It's also the AI. So it's enabling that whole talent that we have everywhere in Europe to also contribute easier to defense and security. But then also health of our economies, I would say, because to have that 5% of GDP, we need GDP. So we have been fiscally quite frugal, so we have that space where to invest now. We do mostly use, we had cut the budget, we cut the expenses from many other areas to devote to defense, but we also had the space for borrowing through the EU's SAFE instrument, so that's what we are doing also. So there is that complexity of everything. I mean, nobody has taken away challenges from Bundeschancellor or ministers to make sure that also economically we are able to function and provide what we need, both for populations but also for the...
Do you have a place or a body
defense
on the European level where you can be so honest with each other that you debate the question, what are we really lacking? What do we really need? How do we get intelligence capabilities? How do we get satellites?
So one thing about the intelligence is that we need to trust our intelligence communities. As politicians, as leaders, we cannot just base on certain prejudices, as it was before Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine, where the US and a number of allies clearly agreed that the invasion is coming. It was very visible, all the indicators were there, and there were, quite many warnings. But then there were some capitals who said, oh, but that cannot happen, because it cannot happen, despite facts right out there. So we have to trust the intel, we have to enable closer cooperation among our intel communities, also internally within the countries. That all has to come together. And plus we have to really close that gap with our military, because, daily discussions between civil military leaders really help to provide military advice, but also in the same time for politicians to understand what is that they are doing and the language they are talking, which sometimes is very, very different from what we are used to. So we are one society, so we have to have that across the board working together and discussing. So I very much welcome the town hall as that's part of the engagement with the community.
Anna, what is high on your wish list, on your priority list?
Well, I think it's about public awareness to a large extent, actually. if we look at Russia's war on Ukraine, I think, unfortunately, year after year after year, people have realized that this is serious. This will not go away. Hopefully, we will sustain it. But I lack a broader awareness of Russia actually conducting, I think, a two-front war. That's the way I see it. It's a military war in Ukraine, but it's a hybrid war against us. And there, the level of awareness is really varying across nations in the EU. I'm a bit surprised by Germany, for instance, but also the UK, countries that are hit quite seriously by Russia's warfare in the hybrid sector.
Just to remind everybody here, the hybrid war started in 2015 by hacking the German parliament.
Exactly.
Including the computers by Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Yeah. And there are a range of, if you look at the hybrid toolbox, Russia has used most of them: sabotage, assassination attempts, espionage, as you said, cyber attacks, over and over again in most countries. And if you look at the map, it happens all over Europe, actually, to more or lesser extent. And I think this is important because why are they doing this? Are they doing this because they want to rule all of Europe? I'm not sure. I don't think so, because they don't have to. What they need to do is to fragment us and weaken our institutions enough to expand their own sphere of interest and keep us basically, EU or NATO gone and the rest of us quarreling together, perhaps expanding territorially to Moldova, seizing Ukraine. And all of this is high on my agenda because I think we have seen it now, as you said, it's almost a decade, or it is more than a decade of hybrid warfare, where they are refining their methods. And we are not responding yet to the extent that we should. And we are not connecting what's happening in Ukraine with the grander destiny of Europe. And we have to do this in order to understand the necessity to invest in defense. I think it's not about the US leaving us in that sense. It's about a threat posed to Europe. And that's high on my agenda.
I would add, which is a real pity, that there are countries in Europe which are much better now in dealing with hybrid warfare or so-called fake news and all these things, that we don't have a real European exchange or lessons learned process. But I agree, this is the kind of aggression which will not stop for a very long time.
I think that's a very important point. We are not connecting the dots enough between countries because we lack, I think, exchange of information. We lack processes how to deal with it. We don't have a joint threat assessment of it. And that keeps Russia's advantage to a pretty low cost year after year after year. And we do have joint institutions. We have the EU, we have NATO, we have other forums we can create. So in a sense, I don't really understand why we are not making this possible. And I think it is because we're not taking it seriously enough. Several countries now are saying, we are not at war, but we're not at peace either. That's why one way of describing the gray zone. But sometimes I think we should say that we are at war. We are at hybrid war, actually, in a peacetime setting for our societies. And that is about also engaging each one of us. I think if you work in a private company, for instance, and you have a cyber attack, you don't think that might be connected to a cyber attack in another country or to an actor such as Russia. You think it's a proxy or someone wants a ransom. But it's part of a greater game. And I think we need to start seeing this pattern and calling the bluff and making that attribution, not only to Russia, but to other actors as well, in order to kind of really solidify our societies. That's where defense starts.
Very good point. Sergei, the same question to you, but I have one more, because you already mentioned it in your opening statement, that there might be those in Europe who are somehow applauding the idea that our country here is now spending 3.5 plus 1.5, but that's a lot of money. And Germany having the biggest and strongest army in Europe is, for reasons we all know, it always comes with a question mark, with a little question mark. I saw the chairman of the MSC, Wolfgang Ischinger, coming up with the idea, and I think he got it from Janusz Reiter, that Germany could use a little of that money to buy a submarine for Poland, or a battleship, or a couple of tanks. Or maybe he could buy it for, we could buy it for the Baltic states. Is that a good idea, that those who have big pockets, deep pockets, could finance defense spending symbolically in other European countries as well?
I think this is a conditio sine qua non for European cooperation. I think we must understand that we need at least 4 principles, and it's buy European, produce European, cooperate European, and this is, by the way, what, for example, EDIP, European Defense Industry Program, is about joint cooperation, and it's really worrisome that the production of a joint jet by Germany and France apparently just failed. At least these are the signs that we're getting from leaks and from the press. And think European. And thinking European is the biggest problem. Will Germany think European way if it is about what we said, just a year ago at this conference about the labor division, that we should have countries that in Sweden they would produce the tanks, and in Germany they would produce the submarines, and in France they would produce the jets. I'm not sure that nation countries and national governments are ready to give up, because in order to prioritize and to specialize, you need to give up something. That's giving up factories, employment. So we probably would need to go a different way, and to try to have more joint ventures in this area. And by the way, and this is something that we insisted in the European Parliament, and I myself put this on European Defense Fund, engage with Ukraine, because the abilities and the experience of this one European country that is at war now is unique. And we see it in the issue of drones and many other innovations. So yes, it will also be the case that some countries will have to assist other countries by providing them with their home-produced weaponry and financed weaponry. What the problem is, and I think this was addressed yesterday during the Defense Council meeting, defense ministers, is the fact that we're getting an asymmetry not between those countries who can and cannot spend money, but who want and do not want to spend money. And this is the north-south asymmetry that we're getting in the European Union, where Spain is openly saying, we would rather invest into our social programs, other programs, and I think it's a fair point. We have to see how we get the balance right, but you cannot opt out from this defense program, which is a joint European enterprise, and this brings a lot of problems with it and a lot of unease on behalf of Baltic states who do not spend maybe that much in absolute terms, but Estonia, for example, is the highest, I think, rating in terms of their relative spending if you compare it to their income, national income. So it is a problem, and this problem is not solved, and you're right, we are lacking a place where we discuss this and decide this. And that's why I'm coming back. It doesn't have to be a Security Council. It has to be a place. There has to be a place where we can discuss this and discuss this also with our partners like UK or Norway or Ukraine.
But let's stick with this point. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that the Munich Security Conference came up with this report. I don't remember the figures correctly, but it was roughly 180 weapon systems produced in Europe and something like 30 or so in the US. So if you go to every European government and ask them, should it be less? Everybody will say yes. But if you ask them, does that mean that you don't produce a tank any longer in this or that country and you move the production to another country? They will probably say no. Or in this time they will probably say, maybe, let's talk about it. And it takes a couple of years, which we probably don't have. So how do we make progress in this area?
So in NATO we have 32 countries, so only 4 of the EU member states are not in NATO, and those are not military, the most mighty ones, Cyprus, Malta, Austria and Ireland, all spending very little on defense. So one theory is they rely on NATO to provide for their security because of the locations where they are. But that provides the obvious answer also, that the answer is within NATO. NATO does have standards, standardification for military equipment, for processes, procedures, for literally everything. And that's to ensure that allies are able to be interoperable on the battlefield. Because at the end, you know, it's not about who produces where, but whatever is produced needs to be possible to be used together. And here, actually, also the war in Ukraine, Russia's attack on Ukraine, then identified quite a bit of issues that, yes, allies were providing howitzers, 155 howitzers, you know, various systems, but then 155 munition was not possible to be used by anybody, by everybody producing it. So that's what is being fixed, actually. As a result of this sort of lesson learned. And there are other things that are being fixed. But then also there is a military answer to what we need to be produced in our countries. Because, for example, in Latvia or in the Baltic states or Finland or Norway, the countries that protect the rest of NATO and the EU, because it's the external border, we need to have pretty short supply chains for various produce, military equipment, and so on and so forth. We need good logistics, we need reinforcement, and so on and so forth. And that's why it's so great also that Sweden now is a member of NATO, because there are issues that can be much easier solved, you know, again, from these exercises and you know, very practical sort of challenges that we had, let's put it that way. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. We just, again, also there, we just need to do it. But yes, you know, having 17 helicopter systems is not good for global competition, because then at the end, it's not only what we need within our systems. We are also successful exporters. Look at Gripens or for Thailand, or look at other stuff going abroad. So that is where I think we have to be rational about what answers are where. So on military defense and standardization and interoperability, that is NATO. On regulation, on all the sort of enabling stuff, that's very much where the EU does have at least a certain number of answers. And then also, I would like to quite strongly reject the notion that we cannot rely on the United States, or that the US has left us, or we are abandoned or something. We really are not seeing that within NATO. It's not, I mean, that is not what we are seeing. 90% of NATO is defense side, military side. That's not what signaling we get there, and it's so better keep cool heads and work where we need to do. And if it's about some political statements that are not acceptable, okay, we call them out, but again, we keep the cool heads at stating the principles that we trust, whether that's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and, you know, whatever we need to say. But that's the sort of practicalities that is there. US still has 30 military bases in Europe, and that provides essential American interests, not only in Europe, but also in the Middle East and projection of power elsewhere. More than half of US military purchases are actually European side of the house. Our intel, our cyber operators, our threat hunters work together on everyday basis. It's close as possible as imaginable. The same when we talk to German military. It's going well, but we also have to accept that uncertainty around political statements and certain notions that shock us or surprise us is there, and keeping cool head and finding what does it mean, and where it's actually political and where it's substantial is crucially important.
Thank you for this first round here. And looking into the audience here, I see a lot of faces who tell me we don't want to wait any longer, and you don't have to wait any longer. Now it's your turn. Please identify yourself. Don't forget a question mark at the end of your question. And who starts? Please.
Ladies, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. My name is Desiree Bichara. I'm working for the Federal Office for Protection, Civil Protection. And my question goes to you, Ms. Wieslander. You mentioned that we are in hybrid war. So I'm just asking how to draw the line between, both from a legal and also political point of view, the line between being in hybrid war or warfare and having hybrid measures.
That's a really tricky question. I think what we are struggling with in dealing with the hybrid attacks, hybrid warfare, is exactly that we have a peacetime legislation in most countries that do not allow for perhaps countermeasures or readiness measures that are needed. And I think that you have to look over the legislation in some countries and perhaps look anew. Most of this legislation is built on experiences from the Second World War and as we built our modern societies. And we did not have this kind of warfare ongoing then. It doesn't really reflect. We are doing that in Sweden. We are looking into certain sectors where you can shift it. You don't want to become authoritarian in that sense in peacetime and have authorities that you don't need to do. But the law also has to be adapted to new circumstances, and I think this work can be done now. We have a decade of experience of what we need to do. So, because the risk on the other side, if we don't do it, is that we are paralyzed in acting towards Russia, and they see and other actors, and we see that if it's too hesitant. A politician, of course, can always make statements and so on, but then you would need the legislative parts to follow through, right, to see how we can deal with these things. And here I think we need to think a bit anew and perhaps start, commissions learn from each other and see what we can do to move within our democratic frameworks, of course, move forward and address this in a more comprehensive manner.
And where are the next hands? Where are the hands behind me here?
Thank you. My name is Wolfgang Kuchler. I'm a Bavarian. I live here in Munich and I work for the German Army, Bundeswehr. My question is, if I listened to you carefully, then I understood we need a vision. And we also have problems currently within our European nations with respect of let's call it a smart sourcing. Each country currently is doing everything. We should have a clear division of labor when it comes to military spendings and the production. And now my question, is there an alternative with respect to the organization we're heading to a federal republic of Europe?
Oh, that's a big one.
Let's have European parliamentarians answer.
Exactly.
I think that we need also to change our thinking about what it means to be a federalist nowadays. I was never a federalist myself. I thought it's quite, I thought it's not realistic. But now, and especially after Greenland, to be honest, I realize we need something that would bring us in the direction of a federal state and a federal mode of working with each other. Especially after we're seeing that the United States is going in a different direction. And yes, there are different cooperative systems that still work. But if you have a leadership that is doing what it's been doing for the past 12 months, and it's just 1 year out of 4, and we don't know what's going to and who is going to come after that. And it started here in this house when we were talked to as if we were from different planets, and we were the problem for world democracy. We are on our own, and on our own means not our own as each nation. We will only survive if we start more intensely harmonizing our work together, and I think that means in the defense industry, some structures, we talked about that. It means in the area of markets that we have to complete the project of a common market, because it's not complete. And we see this in the area of innovation, where we still don't have a common digital market, where we still don't have a common financial market and capital market. And that has consequences. That's why we don't have enough capital for our scale-ups to stay and startups to stay here. That's why it is always American capital or Chinese capital who are taking them out. We are not ready yet for this competition, and we have to be. And the only solution that I see, both in terms of military, but also in terms of innovation, and yes, the pooling effect will be also in terms of political representation, is, don't call it federal, okay, European, further, deeper European harmonization. Any different direction is a suicide under these circumstances.
Who? Oh. The whole block here. So I'll start with you, please.
Lady, good.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to quickly say I appreciate the discussion. And my name is Sophie Rickman. I'm a graduate student at King's College London in the Department of Defence Studies. I found the comment made about this idea of a European Security Council very interesting. It's obviously a topic which comes up very frequently. How can Europe somehow develop a structure which allows for quick, rapid decision-making, especially on the most pressing issues? And I was wondering what your vision was for overcoming this, because it seems to me that a new council could potentially migrate the same issues that we're seeing in NATO or in EU defense structures simply to another body and not overcome them. So I'm wondering, in terms of, you mentioned not the whole EU, and you gave the example of Hungary. Hungary, of course, is well known for vetoing particularly issues on Ukraine in its current political form. But I suppose countries such as Slovakia, the Czech Republic now under Babiš, and also other governments who may head in a more Eurosceptic direction could equally pose the same problems. And given the fact that this is an idea you've been working on for a while, I was wondering if there were any mechanisms you had come up with that could potentially overcome this issue. Thank you.
Of course, I was thinking about this, and I think one of the challenges that we're facing, and I mean, let's be honest, of course, European Security Council, you think on parallels to the UN Security Council. But the difference is, and the difference to the early years, or the first 80 years, 70 years of the European Union, is that we used to have this principle, we forgot about this, and it was a foreign policy continuity. at least when I was a student in Germany, a student of law, we always said, you know, parties change, coalitions change, but there is a foreign policy continuity. So the governments usually follow the same line in terms of their foreign policy and defense policy. Well, that's changed. And I think one way to mitigate is that the so-called permanent members within the European Security Council will not actually be permanent. They will have an opportunity to veto, and they will have an opportunity to decide, and I propose to have 5 permanent members, including, by the way, one of them president of the European Parliament, not because I'm a parliamentarian, but because of this way we get the parliamentary legitimacy in many of those decisions, and I think it's important nowadays. But other countries can be and should be re-elected. Let's say every 3 years or every 5 years, so that if the majority of the countries, and by the way, the proposal is to have it as a multilateral treaty, so it would be an international intergovernmental treaty. So those who sign this treaty and delegate these competences to the Security Council would be able to re-elect the members, and to, if there is a Madame Le Pen or colleague Bardella is the president, and we're seeing they're driving it in the wrong direction, we would be able, and the majority doesn't agree with that, they would be able to call him off or her off, and then elect a different country instead. So this is kind of my mitigating the new realities that we are seeing. And thanks for the question. It's exactly one of the key ones.
Yeah. And one thought from my side, we all know how difficult it is to integrate something which already exists. Sometimes it's easier to start with something which does not exist on the European side. So we are all catching up with cyber defense, for example. Why don't we start with a common cyber defense in Europe, for example? We all have to catch up when it comes to drones, for example. So in those areas where we have to need progress, think about a European element in it from the beginning. And, oh, wow.
Can I just say one thing on all this? Currently, especially speaking to our businesses, the ways they complain about European regulation, I have never heard that before. Because time now requires the speed from decision makers to really make those decisions on simplification, on new trade deals if we can't rely, or if we want to compete with China, who is squeezing us out from all the external markets. And that speed is just not there. Like Mercosur vote in the European Parliament was such a shame. I mean, really. So we are arguing for provisional application of it, because it's German, Latvian, all our companies, industrial producers, who are faced with 30% and more tariffs. How can we compete? And also the simplification packages that we have now on, you know, a variety of issues. We need much faster the sort of burdening of our businesses. There's talent, there's capacity, there's wills, there's everything. So it's just let's act. We don't need to go to pharmacy.
Just a quick question, because I have to justify.
I can feel all the hands in the back here.
Yeah, and all of them are pointing at me and saying Mercosur. No, I just
very... You are the European Parliament.
I mean, first of all, I voted against the stopping of the Mercosur process and procedure, so I was in the minority, both in my party and in the Parliament.
So you voted in favor of Mercosur?
I voted against bringing the case to the European Court of Justice, because I didn't want to stop the process and get us out of the process. But even us, so for example, the Greens, the German Greens, we addressed now the President of the Commission and said, let's have a provisional application, because we all see we need new alliances. This is a way to go. And in the world where we don't have allies, reliable allies, maybe in Washington, I don't know if you agree, we need other democratic new alliances, and Mercosur is, you want it or not, is a democratic club.
Yes, please, you, and wow. Is there anybody here in the audience who does not want to ask a question? Probably not, and that's good. And that's how we are going to do it. It's please shorten your question as much as possible. I will do my best to shorten the answers here as much as possible so that we can hear from all of you. Very much looking forward to it. Please, and with that.
Hi. Timothy Chan. I'm a graduate from the Hertie School. I'll shoot two very fast questions. The first is I'm from Malaysia, and following the question on, looking for new partners and such, what can European countries, and the West in general can offer to ASEAN, Southeast Asia, given that China is offering, a very, one would say, logical vision of development, right? Second question is Franco-German disagreements on, and what is your sense of the direction in filling the saliences in issues such as European integration, French military spending that's being constrained by fiscal constraints, and German military leadership?
Thank you for that. I would suggest that we collect a couple of questions now. Does it work for you? Do you need a...
Yeah, sure.
Please.
So I'm Samah Bouali. I'm in charge of project management and entrepreneurship. It's in health sector. My question is we mentioned already the interoperability. We can all agree that we lack this thing. A lot of initiatives, a lot of startups, they don't continue their work. The startups, they just stop at prototyping as well the initiatives. How can we change that? How can we let the government let go for us? Thank you.
And please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Nana Galandarishvili. I'm a consultant at the moment, but for the longest time I worked countering Russian hybrid threats in Georgia, and hence my question about, we talked a lot about hybrid threats, and I want to bring the discussion to the national audiences, because at the end of the day, we are democracies, we are election-based democracies. Often for the far right or the different radical groups, it's much easier to mobilize their own voters or recruit or influence others based on the defense policy and the foreign policies. This seems to be the topics that work everywhere. It's great what we're talking about, right? European federalism, Security Council, Defense Council, increased spending. We've been talking about this now for, I'm 36. I think I've heard that for 15 years at least since I've been in the field. At the same time, what are we doing to counter the threats within our society? So all this discussion that quite often stays theoretical does not give the weapons or the measures to the far right and other radical groups to mobilize their voters and their audiences that can in the end influence our agendas, our elections, and the way of life we're used to in the West at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And I would say we take two more from this side, and then we go back to the panel. And I have you, and I have you.
Hello all, my name is Georgiana Martinez Garnelo. I'm the General Director of the Global Youth Leadership Forum based in Spain. And my question is for all of you, what can we do as a society to help you to create public policies in order to help, for example, to finish the war in Ukraine beyond the European Initiative Citizen? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Lukas Schlieper. I'm currently a student of law, and I would have a follow-up question actually to the Georgian colleague, as I'm affiliated with Georgia familiarly. So my question would basically be, what are we planning to do with the rampant Russian influence, not only in Georgia, but also many, many, many other membership candidates? Because what I'm seeing in Georgia firsthand is Russia is funding their press, Russia Today, TV, media, and so on. And the European Union barely has a presence against it. And even in Georgia, if I may state one example of how our presence is not strong enough, we're building a very important highway, which is completely funded by the European Union, but it's being built by a Russian-Chinese conglomerate. And on the entirety of that highway, I've driven it many times, there is not a single EU flag. Instead, there is Chinese and Russian signs saying the Russian Federation and the Chinese People's Republic apologize for the inconvenience and is gifting the Republic of Georgia this highway. So how are we planning to strengthen our presence in the membership states, and what are we going to do against the influence of Russia and China in particular?
Thank you. But before we go back to the panel, we now have a full panel. Dovi, thanks so much. So great to have you with us. I don't know if you have heard the last questions. I would suggest that you just jump into our very nice conversation we have here.
There was a question about how we make ourselves more interoperable.
Yeah, and as I understand also, how do we stop Russia and China from being so intrusive into our internal politics, bribing or trying to bribe governments, setting their honey traps, and etc. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to see you all and to be here. And thank you for your patience. And I'm really hoping that maybe the German government could make some agreement with Lufthansa next year. That would be helpful.
Fly Air Baltic.
That's what I had to, but it was 5 hours late.
Okay.
So, nevertheless, I think that the main lesson for us is that we don't really have easy scenarios anymore. And even though, honestly, we all wake up and check social media first to see what our big brother has written this morning, but nevertheless, China is not a solution. China is continuing to have concentration camps. China is continuing to fund Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And China is also getting ready for the expansion of their empire. So I don't think that we should be naive about that. Also, all the countries that have experienced honey trap have paid very dearly or will pay in the nearest future. Therefore, I believe that what we have to do is strengthen ourselves. And also when we plan for the next 5 to 10 years, then understanding of our interconnectedness, first of all with Ukraine, because honestly, we in the Eastern Northern region understand more than anyone that drop of understanding of Russia as a serious threat, which Munich Security Index shows, they went from #1 threat to #8 threat, is threat to us, to our unity, to understanding of our future. And also, one more moment that I wanted to pinpoint is that when I look through the Munich Security Index data, I love data actually, and sometimes it's very informative. It's better to know the truth even if it's ugly. So we ourselves see us as less united, but the countries which are our competitors or sometimes threats see the West as more united. And for me, that is also a very important notice of discrepancy in our self-reflection. We are doing quite good. We have changed our defense funding. We have moved upwards really fast. We have been self-critical beyond measure. Our actions a little bit slower than our words, but also we are doing great in, well, now I'm trying to be diplomatic.
This is not the official part of the conference, so you don't have to be diplomatic.
You can be open.
Okay, then honestly, we are doing great in trying to somehow navigate navigate the rocks of dysfunctional transatlantic family. We are being quite good at understanding that Indo-Pacific is where we also need to be. And I've got some friends asking me, friends from Japan, are you going to be there for us when China attacks Taiwan? Because it is going to hit all the region. Are you going to be there for us? So it's all of us who do not want our lifestyle to be annihilated, that we have to stick together. And I see that maybe Baiba has to go soon.
No, thank you. The secretary has to leave a little bit early, I think it's 4:45.
I'm meeting some allied military, and I shouldn't be late for that.
And, you know, and there you have to arrive on time because it's military, it's not politics. So please.
That was a swipe at us. There was a question on how we bring the war to an end, the war in Ukraine, and the role of civil society. The role of civil society and of civil society groups is unlimited in that respect. One, putting pressure on the politicians in your own countries. Second, making sure you speak out and speak up on principles. And then on the policy decisions, quite clearly further constraining Russia with all instruments of powers that we have, because Russia has been identified as a threat in not only NATO but also EU and beyond. And that will ensure, indeed, less income in Russia's budget, less capability to fight the war, and so on and so forth, because that will put pressure also on political decision-making. We also have to be realistic that Russia has not changed its objectives. And its objectives is not only conquering few villages in Ukraine. It's eliminating Ukraine as a sovereign democratic state. And just think if we let it happen in Europe. But it's also de facto destroying NATO, and it's also making sure that we accept some type of special Russian rights over other countries. Yeah. So those objectives is what Butcher and Kremlin is trying to achieve in his war, but also through peace talks. And he wants something he cannot achieve on the battlefield, which is territory of Ukraine. Donbas will take more than 2 years to be conquered. Last year, Russia took less than 1% of territory. So it's, you know, we have to be very clear that also Europe has the voice, we have the interest, we support Ukraine, and we want to limit Russia's influence. And on internal security side, how do we limit Russia's influence? Awareness, whole society understanding of the threat. It is a threat to us as a society. Whether it's elections, whether it's the views, how we take into account the views from our societies, but also be very open and honest with our people. There's so much wisdom today in the private sector among various groups in society. It's a very decentralized world that we live in terms of how information is perceived and handled. So we have to be quite honest to each other about it. And on far right and left groups, I have difficulties to answer. We don't have them in Latvia because, again, if there are indications that there are threats to security of our democracy, our security services are entitled to have conversations with people, because there is a very strict limit, freedom of speech versus subversive activities and armed a possibility of an armed action. So we take it very seriously, but also education systems and everything, just like we have in Northern Europe. I apologize, I have to leave. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming, and nobody's leaving here without an applause. Anna.
Yes. Well, a couple of points, just to continue on what Baiba said, that I think how to deal with the Russian influence on our societies, it's important to put it out in the open and to track it systematically. And I think you can do that at the agency level quite extensively. There are also various non-governmental initiatives. The Atlantic Council has done it for over a decade, also educating others how, because a lot of it is open sources, it's not in the hidden. If you just see the patterns, you can see how it's done, and you can counter it. But you also need to invest in it from a government point of view, and not just to think that, you know, we will deal with it in natural ways. You have to see it, put it up in the open, and perhaps have campaigns against it or informative campaigns on this is what's going on. And sometimes we have seen that campaigns originating from Russian proxies are connected to right-wing groups internally. So there also could be connections in between national forces and external adversaries. And that's also important. Just put it out in the open and kind of deal with it that way. Systematically, there are methods, but we need to, it's an investment that needs to be done. That's one of my main points. And then the Malaysia question was kind of interesting because it is about, again, what will the EU be as a global actor? How much of an outreach could we have? And what difference do we want to make on the global stage? And there I think we can do much more, but we need to have all the instruments in place, as we have discussed, both the political decision-making process in a more coherent way, perhaps, and the muscles to sustain it. Otherwise, we'll overreach, I think, in our ambitions. And just going out in the world and saying that we have a great proposition and everyone should love us and work with us, that doesn't really work either in a world where great powers move with such competitiveness as they do these times. So we have to think that through, both the leadership and the muscles that we can put with it.
Maybe following up on what you said, I do think that we are waking up in the area of international cooperation, as it is called here in Germany. We used to have a mode of international cooperation which was purely, almost a welfare kind of type of help. We are getting out of that. I think that the Global Gateway program that the Commission is proposing, and the Commissioner Marta Kos is, I think, here, or will be here. We are working very closely together on this. We're working very closely together on connectivity, especially building, I'm working on Eastern Partnership and Euronest, building a corridor and a Black Sea strategy, which will not be based on basically some charitable projects. This is not about that. We're beyond that. But learning also from our American friends, bringing peace by building a Trump road, railway station and a railway path. I think these are instruments that we are increasingly learning to use. And yes, we should be more disruptive in a good way of it. But at the same time, we should not forget who we are. And I think what we are and who we are as a community of values, and the values are still there. They're not gone. Yes, we should be guided by interests a little bit more now in geopolitics. But the values are there. And I think for Malaysia, for many other countries, dealing with the European Union, where the intentions are transparent, I would say authentic, and also checked by parliaments and by democracies and by voters, I think it's a little bit of a better partnership and a more honest partnership than a partnership with China, where we know that there are completely other and more imperialistic interests behind that. And I think this is a proposition that we're giving. This is on that. On the issue of what can we offer to people who are subjected to propaganda, how can we bring them away? I don't think that banning organizations is the only and probably not the best way of going about that. I think we need to listen to people. I think the time is over where we said we're not listening to you because you are either a fascist or a Putin versteher. I never did this. In Brandenburg, which I'm responsible for Berlin, but also for Brandenburg. And when the war started, I did a tour where I talked to people about the war. And yes, many of them scolded at me and said, you're the hawk, you're engaging us into the war. There's our, supporters of AfD and others. And I listened to them and I engaged in a discussion. And in this discussion, we will only win if democracies deliver. If we can explain to people, like we could have and should have explained to Georgian people, and I talked to, the current foreign minister when we still had a conversation of Georgia, and they explained to me, they gave me the narrative that they gave to voters later. They said, we're not bought and controlled by Russia. We're afraid of Russia. And to be honest, if your territory is occupied 20% by Russian troops, you are afraid of Russia. And what we didn't deliver is that we did not defend Ukraine as decisively as it was important, and by that we gave to many of them a narrative into the hand where they said, you can orient yourself towards EU, but then Putin will come and they will not defend you. And this is the geopolitical cost that we are carrying now because we were not decisive and fast enough in defending Ukraine. This is the narrative that is told in Moldova by the pro-Putin forces, and it's told in Georgia by pro-Putin forces, and the election is coming in Armenia, where I'm also very worried about what is going to happen there.
I take 2 questions from this side, and 2 from that side. And I haven't been on that side here, please. You, start please. And where's the second? There was a second hand? Good. Then it's you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Thomas. I'm a reserve officer of the German Army. I have 2 questions related to Greenland and the situation that we had there. We had a situation that the way how America articulate that they want to have Greenland is, let's say, room for improvement. and on the other hand, every military expert was clear that we need to put a better security into this. Yeah? And the question that I have is, why do we need Donald Trump to explain to European citizens that we have a situation there? And the second question is, follow up by that, do we have any other blind spots, let's say, for example, Finland, with a 1,000-kilometer border to Russia? Do we have a blind spot there as well, maybe?
Okay, thank you. From now on, please, only 1 question.
Hi, Natalie Whitman. I come from the tech sector, and we were talking about cybersecurity. On operation technology, we are looking at various industries and companies that are relying on supply chain management, and we were talking about Europe First strategy, but however, I see larger corporations or corporations in Europe still going into technical agreements with Chinese-run companies. So how are we going to manage or leverage and assist European companies to get the right access to go into those large digital mergers to guarantee operation technology safety and cybersecurity?
Very good question, thank you. And here, please, and here. Sure.
Hello. Hi. I'm Amina Bushra Çevik, and I'm also working at the tech sector. So I would like to ask about you about Turkey, because we talk about European alliances, learning from each other when it comes to defense sector, and Turkey has really a big military experience and really strong army. And I know it's a unreliable partner, but when it comes to like alliances and strategical investment, do you see a way to work with Turkey? Because we saw that EU is now thinking about Mercosur agreement, India working with China, but Turkey is a border and a neighbor country. Do we see a strategy there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick Schifrin with PBS NewsHour based in Washington. And perhaps this is best put to Baiba because of her arguments that the United States is still supporting within and still supporting NATO. But I've talked to President Trump's senior aides who argue that Russia long-term is a economic partner of the United States, and even some of them still believe could help the United States against Beijing. How is it possible for Europe, the EU, and European and Canadian NATO to really make plans for the future if the assessment of Russia is so different in Washington than it is in Europe? Thanks.
Perfect scene setter for the rest of the conference. Thank you. So, who starts? Anna, will you start with the Turkey question?
Turkey, Turkey, and I'm happy to talk about Arctic and Russia as well. But Turkey, the EU perhaps, Sergei is more into that, but I mean, Turkey is a very important ally in NATO, for instance, and I think for strategically, one always have to think about security of Europe with or without Turkey into the framework, into the puzzle. And I always think that we land that it's, of course, much better to have Turkey with us in that sense. So if we are having this vision of a future European structure for security and defense, I think Turkey is a very important player in that. Exactly the format, we will have to see because Turkey is associated in various layers, but I think that's the main assumption that Turkey belongs to the European security theater and should be have a major part in it, or a decent part in it as well. Geographically very important situated and a power and towards the Middle East and everything. So I think that's very crucial for the society of for the security of the continent. On the Arctic, I think, why do we need Donald Trump to tell us that it's a blind spot? Well, we don't need Donald Trump to tell us that. That's the short answer. I think we have framed it that way in order to calm things down, but the assessment that NATO has landed in on Greenland in overall the Arctic Sentry that is launched is built on an assessment that we have done within the alliance for quite some time, that Russia has modernized its military resources in the Arctic, expanded, and China has increased its interest in the Arctic region. And if you have those two great powers expanding their presence, expanding their interests, we cannot be absent, and NATO should be more involved. That has been part of the discussions in the past 5 years. And what we are doing now, I think, is very good, embedding the concerns of allies into the NATO structure and acting collectively to address it, and thereby also removing the most extreme claims that the US made a few weeks ago on Greenland. And I think we can have a much more sensible way of approaching those security concerns. And I don't, on Finland, no, I don't think it's a blind spot, even though it's a very long border to Russia. It's interesting, I mean, Finland can mobilize most troops in Europe, and it's not really the biggest country, right? But they have a system where they have secured the border, and I think we are not now even stronger in that sense. So I think I don't think there is a blind spot up in Northern Europe in that sense. Russia long term, I think it's a very reasonable question, and we should be much aware of that, because what is an alliance if we don't have a joint threat assessment? We can move on for some time with various threats assessments, and we can spend some time discussing it, of course, calibrating geography, big countries, small countries, and all of that. But and we have done that with Russia, so there is a foundation on which the regional operational plans and the capability targets and everything are set for, and that's Russia as the most significant and direct threat to transatlantic security. Now, would that change for long term? Of course, it's a problem for us, and we would need to recalibrate and adjust, definitely.
So to make this a little bit more interesting, I'll try to be devil's advocate for a bit. Now, it was quite easy to look at the headlines about Greenland and Donald Trump and to see, well, some whim or some, well, absolutely emotional disregarding of international order action. But if we try to look deeper, and as I said, I love data, so when we look at the historical perspective, it was the third time that United States expressed initiative to control Greenland's territory. And also looking historically, there was a situation when United States were asked to defend Greenland's territory. So it's not that outrageous. Secondly, when we look from the military technical point of view, Greenland is critical in defense of the United States. Currently, the radars that are there are not enough. They are not able to discriminate certain types of threats. So the radars need to be renewed, and they are going to cost a lot. And the missiles need to be placed there if we really do care about security of the biggest and so far the member who contributes the most to the NATO. Sorry for my really clumsy sentence here, but what I mean is that United States still does contribute to NATO the most compared to any other single NATO member. And they do have their security needs. And Greenland is the spot geographically where the threat to United States by a certain type of missiles could be noticed only there and could be intercepted only there before Alaska. And therefore, for them, it is something which is a critical issue. And the discussion was less about that and more about the methods. Nobody liked the methods. There is no discussion about that. Even as devil's advocate, I cannot do that. But do we really understand the necessities of security of the United States? I'm not sure that we always are empathetic enough. Secondly, about the North. I agree that we now see more of the threats that are happening in the North. But do we need Donald Trump to tell us about them? And that's why I was smiling, and here is the devil advocate's line. Sometimes we do. In 2018, when Denmark actually failed to ensure building of the airports in Greenland, we were about this far from having China control critical infrastructure in a critical geographical spot. And if it was not for Pentagon, if it was not for the Defense Secretary at the time, I think it was Jim Mattis, if I'm not wrong, who was quite categorical in saying to Denmark, fix it, because we're all going to have a problem. We could have had a huge problem. So therefore, sometimes those rude Americans do have a very good point, even though we don't really like it. Now, talking about other northern problems, when I talk to my colleagues and friends in Finland and in Sweden and in Norway, we, in the Baltics, next to them, neighbors, I am not sure that we have understood for the past few years how sensitive that is, how sensitive a lot of geographical spots are in the north. And one of the reasons is that maybe we have just been looking from the eastern flank side, but not enough from the northern flank side. And that's what needs to be done more. And one more point about the difference of opinions, different threat assessment. I think it's important also to know in those terrible times of a lot of desperate moments that sometimes the military are doing a better job than we politicians. When I see how the threats are assessed from the side of military, from the side of intelligence, there is much more consensus than from our side. And therefore, what really gives me a little bit of hope that through the alliance, as we know, the intricate mechanisms are made so that the threat assessment is constantly and consistently checked between partners and information is shared, and therefore we have quite professional eyes and really good brains. It would be really important for us not to mess that up, but I'm hoping that since politicians talk a lot, but do a lot less, that maybe we won't be able to mess it up in the few years to come.
To add a couple of points. On Greenland, I mean, Americans were not going out of their way to be active in Greenland just a couple of years ago. And we know that they actually reduced the presence of American troops to 150, not 150,000, 150 American troops on one basis in Greenland. So it's not like they saw the light or they have been seeing the light. The light went on now, And I think the problem is not that the light went on, but for which purpose the light went on. I think the problem here is that a strategic asset, and yes, there is a strategic one, a strategic asset was dealt here and was treated here like a real estate. And everything else came on top. I do share your concerns about our own strategic blindness. And this is what you actually want to say. And this is a different topic. I just wouldn't bind it together with what happened and has been happening on Greenland, because this was a disgrace for an ally to behave like that vis-à-vis us. But the fact is that we should go through our borders and frontiers, and we should look at our strategic weaknesses and where are our strategic enablers, maybe not in our own hands. This is a homework that has to be done, and I think this is something that, a conclusion that was drawn from a lot of crises. I mean, starting with the drones, that we're now talking about the drone frontier on the east. We should also discuss it on the north. We had also in Denmark drones flying. I don't think that we need to be worried about Finland, because Finland can take care of themselves. They have a great army compared to everyone else. But point taken, this is the longest border of a lot of kilometers, I think thousands of kilometers with Russia, and this is definitely something to look at, and I'm sure that it's being looked at. Maybe what I think Ellie Whitman, if I remember, talked about the cybersecurity. European Union is actually looking at it now from the supply chain perspective increasingly. And if we look at how the cybersecurity legislation should be reformed, NIS2 should be reformed, how we're talking about the procurement regulations, this plays a big role. And, you know, it played a big role with the view of Chinese influence. Huawei is just one example. But, of course, now the more delicate question is our dependencies on American security and American software. And this is where it's getting messy and complicated. You know, there is a push for more digital sovereignty, and it's interesting that this is not connecting to China. It's interestingly connected to Microsoft, or the worry that Microsoft can shut down things, which I am not sure. I talked to Microsoft. It's not as black and white as it's being portrayed. And again, we should be careful about that. I usually talk about, you know, we need a strategic parallelism. We cannot just get rid of American technology in many cases. But even there, the homework would be the same. Let's go through it. Let's see where are we dependent on American technology in security-sensitive issues. Where can we substitute, and where should we regulate or find another deal, for example, about our data regarding American technology. Turkey, I mean, this is one case where geopolitics cured a lot of problematic relationship. When the attack on Ukraine started, I remember me sitting with our Turkish colleagues, and the conversation was different on behalf of many of the European legislators. It doesn't make Turkey a perfect democracy. I mean, democracy, question mark, question mark, question mark. But it does, of course, make Turkey, or underlines that Turkey is the biggest army after the American army within the NATO, and that we do work with Turkey, and with their control over the Black Sea and Mediterranean Sea Strait, they did play an important role at the beginning of this war vis-à-vis Russian fleet, for example, and the controlling access to Black Sea strategy, to Black Sea. So it's a very complicated relationship, but it's a relationship where we're having a transition from a partnership vision to maybe, from a membership vision as a EU to a partnership vision. Because our Turkish colleagues are always talking about a membership prospect, and I'm not sure how realistic it will be. And I will finish very briefly on United States, Trump and Putin. And I think they both share one thing, not just some authoritarian character traits. They share a vision of merchandising world order and domestic politics, of merchandising politics. Putin is using politics to be probably the wealthiest person in the world. Trump is using politics to do what he's always done, selling and buying and making transactions. And they understand each other best. I'm not going into the discussions, and I leave this to Americans, what other dependencies are there and what other control mechanisms are there from Moscow towards Washington. We don't want to go to the conspiracy theories of some being assets of, I don't want to go there, but at least on the ideological realm, they are twin brothers from different mothers, because they share this precise view of the world. Money.
Twin brothers from different mothers. Even 2 hours comes to an end, so we have 10 minutes left, and you really have been a great audience, and I have seen so many hands up. We can't take all your questions, but if you really have one which can't wait, could you please show me both arms? Saying, this is, I don't want to leave here without having had the opportunity to ask my question. So I have, oh wow, there, it's. Okay, then we see how far this goes. A very quick one, 2 hands here, and then it goes over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christoph Schmidt. I'm from Germany, and I have a short question. Is Germany doing enough to defend Europe against an aggressive Russia? Thank you.
Christoph, very good one, very short one. It goes over to you, please.
Nicolas Arboleda, working in the aerospace sector. My question is about nuclear weapons. In the context of the end of the New START Treaty and China's nuclear buildup, what role should Europe play in nuclear arms control, non-proliferation, and when the time comes, disarmament? Thank you.
Please.
Good afternoon. Simon Rankin, working with the United Nations. Data point. One continent we haven't talked about is Africa. Where do you place it in that current discourse? Because we're currently just speaking East-West, but what about new allies? What is the future or vision in 10 or 20 years?
And this is only one hand, but I had 2 hands here.
Ukraine is the most, Trudy Rubin, I write the Worldview column for the Philadelphia Inquirer. The most important strategic issue for Europe seems to be Ukraine, and yet you've been reduced to the sidelines on the peace process. All you are doing is keeping President Trump from adopting Putin's policies. Is there a more aggressive policy you should be pursuing with the peace process, and would Putin believe it?
I think we go in reverse order now, and then we start with you, and you don't have to take all of them now, because it's 7 minutes left or so. And I mean, if planes are not flying and trains are not coming on time, we end here on time.
Well, thank you. I'll address a couple of them. First, the very short question there, if Germany is doing enough to defend against Russia. Well, I think Zeitenwende 2, or whatever to call it, the new Zeitenwende, the latest investments in defense from Germany and following through on those are extremely important, as I see it, for the future of European security. And I really hope that Germany and Germans appreciate and understand the importance of this for the whole Europe. The biggest country, third biggest economy in the world, as I third or fourth, And for us, even though we invest, more than you do as percentage of GDP as smaller countries or middle-sized countries in Europe, it cannot compare to the investments that you are, able to do. You're a leader in the European Union, together with France, the others. So this is just for Germany to step up and take on that responsibility is so important. And a very important part of this is, I think, the shift that we have noticed in a bigger understanding of Russia as a systemic threat to Europe. A more long-term threat, that it's not a local problem that will be solved when the Ukraine war is over, but that Russia is something much more fundamental for Europe to deal with. And I think that we have heard much more of that from Germany, and that means much more of a long-term commitment to lead, which is very important. And we are watching Germany in this regard and having expectations on Germany. I think we, as in other European countries. I'm from Sweden. So this is hugely important for not only it's not only a German discussion. That's what my main point. It's important for the future of Europe. And that perhaps leads to the question of Europe's role for peace in Ukraine. Sure. We have on one hand, we have now 1 year with President Trump leading the peace negotiations with the strategy that they have chosen, which is mainly to put pressure on Ukraine and not so much on Russia, and not really including Europe that much unless we fight our way into the discussions, which we sometimes have been able to do. And then we're out, and then we're back in. So it has kind of had that dynamic throughout the year. I think Europe should have much more of a central role because, the Trump administration says themselves that Russia is mainly something for Europe to handle as a threat, and Ukraine's future is also mainly something for Europe to handle as a threat. But so why are we not leading the process? Well, one argument might be that then President Putin does not pick up the phone when we call, but when Trump calls, he picks up the phone, so something happens. That's a fair enough argument. However, I think it should be natural in all steps that Europe is at the table. Why aren't we not? Well, we do fail sometimes to show. We did not succeed with the frozen assets, for instance, so we don't. We do a lot, but we don't really sometimes either not able to align in a way that can push and be more agile and more and push Russia even more that we can. And we do not want. I think one problem is also. I will end with this. It's psychological. We always expect the U.S. to lead in a way. And we are comfortable with that position because that is how it has been for very many years. And when we are supposed to lead, it's not so comfortable, and we don't really have the mechanisms for that. And now, I think that's also part of the problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe adding a couple of points on this, and greetings to Philadelphia, to the readers. The one point is that I think that at this point, Europe has delivered during this new push for negotiations by Trump, and this meant that first of all, we have strengthened the position of Ukraine at the negotiation table, and I think this was immensely important, and that we put ourselves to the negotiation table, at least on the issues that are important to us. That we contributed by agreeing on some sort of security guarantees, which we can contribute. I don't think that we can compete with Witkoff, Kushner, and the whole family crowd there, just because we don't have this type of politician and this type of politics. And that's why it works with them and it doesn't work with us. When I heard that the French advisor of the French president was in Moscow, I don't you know, I don't think this is a bad idea. Okay, well, why not talking? You can always talk. But then I started thinking, because there was some talk that we should, I think Latvia even wanted to appoint an envoy by the EU who should start talking like this. And I just don't have fantasy to think about a person who would fit this prescription, this description. Because anyone who is decent would not be accepted by Putin. You know, Kaja Kallas or anyone, I mean, he will not accept them. And anyone whom Putin accepts will probably have some Geschmäckle, as they say in German. You know, it's like Schröder. He could be a successful envoy because they have a special relationship like Witkoff, you know. But I don't think we want anything like this. So, and that is almost one of the main problems that we're talking about here. Yes, disarmament, of course we should play a role, and we should play a role during the negotiations of the new treaty. The problem is that now we are talking more about issues like who's going to help us and who will give a nuclear protection to us if something happens and Americans don't want it. I mean, this is a totally different world than when we talked about disarmament, and that's the tragedy of it. We should talk about disarmament, but we can't, because the agenda now is to overcome our preoccupation with disarmament and brushing away the issues that are not as comfortable. And the issue is what is happening to the nuclear agenda and nuclear participation. I will leave it there and give over to you.
So I'll start from Germany. As the former defense minister of Lithuania, I can say that Germany is doing a lot. Because German brigade in Lithuania is an example, not only in Europe but also the United States, that Europeans can do quite a lot. And one more thing that I want to underline, talking about Germany. In 10 months, such a huge country went from being client number 1 of Russian energy to buying zero gas, zero oil. And that is respectable. Now, about Africa. I think that we have to admit, looking at data, both economical, military, financial, and political, that we have surrendered Africa to Russia and China. And one of the reasons is that, again, we love to hear ourselves. We don't always love to hear others, especially when we are different. So opening our eyes and ears and actually realizing that if all the countries of BRICS, I don't want to see BRICS, okay, so BRICS, these countries say that threat number 1 is climate crisis, forest fires, etc., and we don't hear them, then, I mean, we hear them in conferences and in NGO meetings, but not on the actual decision-making level. So therefore, I think that there is still a long way to go for us to have a real connection with Africa. Now, peace negotiations. Are there peace negotiations? I mean, we call them such, but there are no peace negotiations. For me, coming from a family which was destroyed by Russian regime, this looks to me like 1945, when we had Victor's peace, when my land was called Bloodland for years, because we were sold. I don't want Ukraine to be sold. I don't see any peace negotiations so far. I see certain movements to maybe find a way to save more people. Now Ukrainians are being drained of blood, of money, of everything. And we are buying time with our blood. But again, I used to be called very pessimistic. Now I think I'm being called more realistic. I don't think this is going to be over. Not over soon. I don't think this is going to be over before we have this global forest fire, before we have both Russia and China in quite a coordinated manner, having multiple entry points in different regions. And we are going probably to have the war of the worlds, the autocratic world and the democratic world, or sometimes democratic with 3 question marks, but still more on the democracy side. And that's when we will decide whether in 2035 we are going to have not 5% GDP for defense, but whether we will live free. That will be the question. And the last thing, nuclear disarmament. I hope that my grandkids will see it, but I don't have much hope. I think we will have to go up before we go down. If people in Japan are considering certain nuclear options, guys, what are we talking about? This world currently finally lost an illusion that we live in peacetime. We do not live in peacetime. And we live in the time where the strongest wins. And if we do not put money on the table, if we do not have enough guns, then all our beautiful talks are worth nothing, not even the paper they are written on. Thank you.
Thank you. And we all wish it would be different. And with that, I'm closing the first session of this year's Munich Security Conference. It was a pleasure spending it with all of you here, especially with you, Anna Dovile, Sergei. This is your applause. Thanks so much. But before you go, there's a second group which really deserves a big hand. And this is those who are organizing this year's conference. Those here in the back, those who are working hard to make things like that happen. Thanks so much, and with that, have a great evening. Thank you.